Constitutional history of Brazil. Introduction. With an area of 8.5 million square kilometers and a population of over 202 million, Brazil is the largest and most populated Latin American country. After more than 300 years of Portuguese rule, Brazil became independent in 1822. It first adopted a monarchical system until 1889, when a republic was established. Since 1889, the country has had several forms of government, including state autonomy and centralization, authoritarianism, and democracy. Constitutional history. Brazil's independence was proclaimed on September 7, 1822, by the then Prince of Portugal, who became Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil. Since then, the country wrote 7 other constitutions, beginning with the Constitution of 1824. The 1824 Constitution gave the emperor wide control over governing institutions, such as the legislature and provincial governments, and lasted until 1889, when Pedro II was overthrown and the Republic of Brazil was formed. 1891 Constitution. This first republican constitution was very similar to the United States Constitution. It established a presidential system and male universal suffrage from the age of 21. It contained provisions for separation of powers, checks and balances, a bicameral legislature, direct elections, and created a federal chamber. The former provinces were declared states, giving these individual entities a strong presidential or gubernatorial character. 1934 to 1937 constitutions. In 1930, Getulio Vargas organized a military revolt and led a coup d'état. His government created a new constitution in 1934. A couple of years later, Vargas faced a counter-revolution, forcing him to stage a coup, after which he began a new constitutional process. The resulting 1937 constitution was authoritarian, concentrating executive and legislative powers in the president, who was the supreme authority of the state, elected by indirect elections for a term of 6 years. Article 187 of the Constitution required conducting a plebiscite in order to approve the text before it entered into force, but it was never held. The president had powers to appoint the governors of the provinces, who in turn appointed the mayors of cities. As this was a de facto rule, Vargas legislated by decree. During this period, all political parties were dissolved, the Congress was closed, and individual rights and guarantees were suspended. The government had a great intervention in the economy, and the subsoil and waterfalls were nationalized. The 1937 Constitution allowed Vargas to proclaim a dictatorship called the New State, Estado Novo, and to remain in power for another decade. The 1946 Constitution. The 1946 Constitution replaced the new state's dictatorship of Getulio Vargas after he was overthrown by his war minister. A representative democracy was established and a new president, Eurico Gaspar Dutra, was elected for 5 years. A constituent assembly drafted a more balanced and liberal constitution which re-established basic individual rights and the separation of powers. The document also maintained an important role of the state in the nation's economy and reflected the influence of the U.S. Constitution with respect to federalism. The 1967 to 1969 constitutions. In the following years, the 1946 Constitution suffered many amendments through institutional acts which severely compromised the document's spirit and eliminated its democratic character. It was replaced by a new constitution in 1967. This document was again changed through a constitutional reform in 1969. Both constitutions were characterized by centralized power in the executive, in particular in the president, as they sought to institutionalize the military regime. The presidential term of office was increased from 4 to 5 years, and the president was given more power to decree laws related to taxation, creation of public employment, and the determination of salaries for civil servants. Institutional acts were used by military leaders to remove opposition members from the Congress. The transition to the 1988 Constitution. In the 1970s, the military regime faced popular uprisings and dissatisfaction as economic progress began to slow. The transition from authoritarian rule to democracy started in 1974 when President Ernesto Geisel and his chief of cabinet, General Golbery de Couto e Silva, conducted a gradual process of political opening, or liberalization, which was characterized by small advances that limited the establishment of a full democracy. The first important measure was the organization of free congressional elections in 1974. In 1982, the military allowed direct elections for state governors and gradually increased federal transfers to municipal governments. Additionally, a new law on political parties led to an opening of the political life. In 1985, the government approved the convocation of the National Constituent Assembly, Assemblea Nacional Constituinte ANC, to draft a new constitution. For the 1988 constitution drafting process, the 559-member Assembly adopted a from-scratch participatory methodology and organized public hearings. After 20 months of deliberation, the ANC produced the 1988 Citizen Constitution. This text required each state to rewrite its constitution and each municipality to elaborate its organic law. Structure of government under the 1988 Constitution as amended. Under the current constitution, Brazil is a presidential, federal republic. Through an amendment in 1996, municipalities were incorporated with states as part of the federation. Consequently, the country is composed of 26 states and the federal district, Brasilia. The federal, state, and municipal governments have their own legislative, executive, and judicial institutions. The aim of the 1988 text was to give state and municipal governments administrative autonomy and responsibility for policy implementation, decentralizing the federal power. The executive branch. The executive is headed by a president who is directly for a 4-year term. He or she is both head of the state and head of the government. Although all of Brazil's constitutions since 1891 prohibited consecutive presidential terms, a 1997 amendment changed this rule. A president now has no limit on number of terms but may not serve more than 2 terms consecutively. Of the 48,000 positions the Brazilian president has the power to appoint, including ministers of state, military officers, and judges, only ambassadors, higher court judges, the Solicitor General, and central bank directors must have Senate approval. The legislative branch. The federal legislative branch is bicameral, consisting of the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. There are 513 federal deputies. 3 members from each state and federal district are elected to serve 8-year terms. 1/3 and 2/3 of members are alternately elected every 4 years. 81 senators are elected by proportional representation from each state and serve 4-year terms. The judicial branch. The federal judiciary is composed of the Federal Supreme Court, the Superior Court of Justice, regional federal courts, labor courts, the electoral court, and the military court. The Supreme Federal Court is the highest court and consists of 11 justices appointed by the President and approved by the Senate. The court can declare federal, state, and municipal laws unconstitutional and therefore null. New constitutional developments and challenges. In 2013, the Brazilian government faced a widespread national dissatisfaction, expressed in the country's largest protests in 20 years on a range of issues. These included corruption accusations, the costs associated with hosting the 2014 FIFA World Cup, and the general high living costs. President Dilma Rousseff sought to overcome this situation, proposing to vote on amending Brazil's constitution by calling for a constitutional assembly to reform the political system. Timeline for constitution building process. 1500. Portuguese land in the area and claim it to the Portuguese crown. 1822. Son of Portuguese king declares independence from Portugal and crowns himself Pedro I, Emperor of Brazil. 1889. Monarchy overthrown, Federal Republic established. 1930. Revolt places Getúlio Vargas at head of Provisional Revolutionary Government. 1937. Vargas leads coup, rules as dictator with military backing. Economy placed under authoritarian state control, start of social welfare revolution and reform of laws governing industry. 1945. Vargas ousted in military coup. Elections held under caretaker government. New constitution returns power to states. 1964. Goulart ousted in bloodless coup, flees into exile. Military rule associated with repression but also with rapid economic growth based on state ownership of key sectors. 1974. General Ernesto Geisel becomes president, introduces reforms which allow limited political activity and elections. 1988. New constitution reduces presidential powers. 1997. Constitution changed to allow president to run for re-election.
2013.
June, a wave of protests sweeps the country. People take to the streets in dozens of cities to demonstrate over woeful public services, rising public transport costs, and the expense of staging the 2014 World Cup. The protests continue into the autumn.